broses o gyfieithu erthyglau Wicipedia a ella sôn chdi bach am gynnwys agorad open access hefyd. So I'm welcoming Gustavo to the WiciMôn podcast. Welcome. So Gustavo is a PhD candidate in translation studies at the University of Manchester. And before that, he was a student at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology in Trondheim. Did I pronounce it right?
Yeah.
Trondheim. So it's very nice to see you again, Gustavo. We met at the Celtic Knot Conference, I think it was in Aberystwyth 2 years ago.
Yeah, that was the first time we met, yeah.
Yeah. I think that's one of the highlights of my job, just to go to these different conferences around Britain and get to meet new people and people who are involved with Wikimedia and Wikipedia, and to learn from each other as well, So can you tell us a bit about yourself, firstly, and your involvement with Wikipedia?
Yeah, sure. Well, I started writing Wikipedia back in 2006 when I was doing my BA in English, and it was just trying to find information for my subjects. I didn't know what Wikipedia involved at the time. Just came across it when I was on Google, and I decided to give it a go. And I was like, wow. The first thing that I had heard about Wikipedia before, but I didn't know that you could actually write something there. So I created my account, and I immediately got hooked. It was like magic. It was like I started writing, and I for example, I started writing about articles about English literature that were not available on Spanish Wikipedia, because that's my own wiki.
Yeah.
And imagine now we're in 2020. Imagine how Wikipedia was 14 years ago, and especially not the English Wikipedia, but other languages of Wikipedia. So Spanish Wikipedia back then was a very small community, and so there was a lot of work to do, many things to translate. I just found a place for me to work, and I became very active, more active than I am now, I have to say. But yeah, that's basically my journey. And then after 3 years on Spanish Wikipedia, where I also became an administrator, I decided to move to Catalan Wikipedia. So because I was living in Catalonia, so I just wanted to learn the language a little bit better. Even though the people in Catalonia, most people are bilingual, but I thought that Wikipedia could be a very good. I have to say it was a very good, but maybe not the conventional kind of source that you would go to learn a new language, but it was an experiment for me, and it worked. So I used Catalan Wikipedia. I translated articles from Spanish into Catalan, and tried to improve my fluency in that language as well. And it worked. I found, again, friends there in Catalan Wikipedia that helped me along the way. And I became very active there as well, even more active than in the Spanish Wikipedia. And I wrote about many different things, thousands of articles there.
So it was a very fluent process, really, wasn't it?
Yes. At first, when I started in Catalan Wikipedia, I could read and understand Catalan, but I couldn't write it. So to some extent, I relied heavily on automatic translation and also help provided by colleagues within that community. And then the more the more involved I became in that project, the easier it was for me. And so at some point, I didn't have to use automatic translation anymore. I could just translate from one article from one language into another without using those kind of tools. So, and I still do it today to some extent. So now, for example, when I'm inspired and I have time, I translate articles, for example, from English Wikipedia, and if the article is not available into Spanish Wikipedia or Catalan Wikipedia, I translate into both languages.
Ah, right. Okay.
So yeah, and I've done a little bit in another minority language, which is called Asturian as well, which I don't speak, but I kind of understand the grammar. So I also work there. And when I moved to Norway in 2015 to do my master's, I also use Wikipedia as a source, you know, to learn the language. I became reasonably active there in that community, and I also joined Wikimedia Norge. Yeah, I was working there for a few years until I moved to the UK.
So how many articles are on the Spanish Wikipedia? Is it?
Well, last time I checked, we had over 1,600,000 articles.
Yeah. So what about the Catalan Wikipedia? Is it more or less?
We have less articles.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But even though we have less articles, the Catalan Wikipedia is a very active community. So when you take into account the number of speakers in the Catalan Wikipedia, the number of articles is actually comes as something very surprising. And on the other hand, well, one of the things that we've always been talking about with the Spanish Wikipedia is that how a language is spoken by 500 million people around the world has, only 1 million articles, compared to other communities. So I think that Catalan Wikipedia in this regard is an example of commitment and how a community can come together and make something great.
I think we've got on the Welsh Wikipedia, I think we've got over 100,000 articles, which is quite good, really.
Yeah, that's very impressive. Yeah.
So, language is very important to you. So what made you go into that particular field then?
You mean translation or?
Yes.
Well, I've always been interested in learning languages since I was a kid. I grew up in a monolingual environment where I was only exposed to Spanish until I was 8 years old, and then I became increasingly exposed to English from that age. And it was something easy for me. The only contact I had with the language was like 4 to 5 minutes a week. Even then, I soon realized that it came as something easy for me, and I said, well, why not? This is maybe something I want for my professional development. It's something that I want to explore in the future. Now, when it comes
have you ever considered learning Welsh?
Yes, and I have to say, that I even bought the book.
Wow!
Yes, I did. Yes, but I it's just that I started with the first, second lessons, and then I gave up.
I think there's too many and
yes. Yeah,
but
that's
great.
Yeah.
Oh, you can. Afterwards you can join us on the Welsh Wikipedia and you can write some articles for us.
Sure. Yeah, I would like to. I've been writing articles about Wales in the Catalan Wikipedia, Spanish Wikipedia, and also the Asturian Wikipedia. Actually, I don't know if you are aware of it, but I think like 2-3 years ago there was a kind of collaboration project between the Welsh Wikipedia and the Asturian Wikipedia, where in editors from the Welsh Wikipedia would write about towns in Asturias, and people from Asturias in that language will write about Wales in that.
Oh, fantastic! Yeah.
So I think that we should actually encourage those kind of projects. especially between minority languages.
Yeah, I think that's a very good idea, because I think that's one of the main aspects of the Celtic Knot conferences, where people from minority languages come together and share ideas. So yeah, I think that's a pretty good idea. Maybe a future project. Gustavo, brilliant. Yeah,
definitely.
You are an open access advocate. So do you mind telling the listeners what that is, and why do you favour it? And what kind of role does it play in the wonderful world of Wikipedia?
Yeah, well, to put it very, very simple, open access means that you can have access to that information and you can reuse that information without having to pay for it, without having to pay for a subscription or anything like that. And in particular, in my field as a researcher, open access is becoming increasingly important. So now a lot of universities across the UK and the world are endorsing this initiative. So for example, previously some academic journals would ask you to pay for subscription to have access to specific content. And now the belief is that in a world where we actually have to share a lot of information, where a lot of people are producing knowledge all the time, it is very unfair to ask others to pay for that. So it's a community. It's basically a concept of cooperation between researchers. And when it comes to Wikipedia, it's very simple. It's that people can have access to Wikipedia, without having to pay, and then the access was always going to be there. And you can reuse that information provided that you acknowledge a source, and so on. So that's something that, as I said, is being done here as well at the university level. I actually attended a conference in Edinburgh last year, which is called Force, which I really encourage people to attend. And there were also Wikipedia workshops there. So in that kind of conference, a lot of academics from different parts of the world come together and discuss the future of open access in academia, research, investigations, Wikipedia, access to information. So I think that it is, as I said, it is unfair to ask people to pay to have access to that kind of information. And I saw that when I started doing my research a few years ago. It is unfair when you're writing something, and when you're working on your project and you need that specific source and you cannot access that source because you have to pay for it, or you have to be enrolled in a specific institution which has access to that information. Yeah.
So yeah, there are more universities now embracing the idea of open access. What about schools, Gustavo?
Schools. I'm not really aware of how the schools are doing in that regard, but I think that it's a global trend now, and if it becomes actually recognized at the top level at the universities, I don't see why schools are not going to follow suit.
Yeah. Because I think it's one of the things, when I go around schools, I think it's one of the things that the teachers and the students tell us, you can't trust Wikipedia, and we've heard it all before. So something like that is, I think, very, very important, and I had a discussion with a pupil, and as part of the Welsh back, and he was telling me that citations are important, and I think teachers now are seeing that there is an important role for Wikipedia in academia. So no, that's very, very positive, really. So what do you think is the future for open access then? Is it a bright future?
Yeah, I mean, I don't foresee a future without open access, to be honest. And so now, as I said, a lot of universities are following that specific trend, and even universities are spending money on open access. There are a lot of initiatives that are being, held all across the UK. And for example, I attended one last year at the library in my university, and we even had the Open Access Week here at the university. So I think that, I see that open access is a way to go. And I don't see any, of course, there's a lot of work to do in that regard. I mean, we are not even close to have open access in all areas, unfortunately, but we are getting there. And I think that in 2020, that has become clear, and the fact that a lot of interest, a lot of people are interested in this is a good sign that we're having this discussion now.
Yeah. I've got another question for you. Do you remember what was your first article you created or edited?
Yes.
Back now.
Yes. And I feel so ashamed because the first article I created in 2006 was about a very, very small spa resort in South America.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yes. And the way it was written was horrible. I mean, it's not like a promotional kind of article, and I didn't have any interest in that. I mean, it was not working for anyone there. And actually, my first experience was not very good. I mean, and this is something that it's good that you mentioned it, because it's something that a lot of new users and new editors of Wikipedia unfortunately face sometimes. And it's the fact that when you start, when you see, oh, Wikipedia, I want you to contribute to Wikipedia, I want to write something for Wikipedia, and then you're not really aware of all the rules that are behind it. And just because you think that you can edit Wikipedia, you can write, pretty much about everything.
Yeah,
that's not true. And this is something that happened to me when I wrote that first article in 2006. An administrator contacted me immediately and said, "Oh, we're just going to mark this article for deletion because it doesn't meet the criteria. Wikipedia is not neutral. It's not so." And I said, at that moment, I was a little bit frustrated. I said, I'm not going to give up on this article. So I insisted, and I contacted that administrator, and they gave me advice and everything. And I also contacted another senior administrator, and she was very, very nice to me, and she helped me improve the article, and the article was rescued, so it was not deleted. And then I said, well, okay, I can carry on now. I know exactly how to write my next article. I know what not to do. So I carry on, and yeah, that's very much the story.
I think you're right there, because as part of our, the school initiative, we're trying to target, young people to write articles in Welsh. And the first thing I do is go through the rules so that they know what to expect of them, and what rules to keep, and all that. So I think it's very, very important part of the project, really. It's kind of a taster session in a way. Oh, brilliant. Okay. What's your favorite article?
My favorite?
Yeah. Because I've been asking in the podcast in Welsh, I've been asking them what their favourite Welsh article is. But so, what's your favourite article then?
Oh, in general or writen by?
Yes, yeah, in general, yeah.
That's a good question, actually.
Put you on the spot now.
I have no idea. There's so many articles. I don't know. Which one? Well, I've recently been working on an article. It's not my favorite article, but it's the article that came to my mind now. Just popped. up, and it's the article about, it's a very controversial article. It's about Falklands War. So yeah, that's the article I've been working on recently from a research perspective. And I found it was quite an interesting article. And it's also illustrative of how, you know, the same article can be presented in a slightly different way in different languages of Wikipedia.
Yeah.
Depending on you know, the language, depending on the community, depending on who writes that article.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say that one is a good article. The article on Wales is quite good as well, actually.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
And another one I've been very involved in. I was, well, at least 1 year ago, I was heavily involved in. It was the National Library of Wales in Aberystwyth, which is in English Wikipedia is well, it's a huge article. So I was translating that article for quite a long time, actually. So I translated that article from English into Spanish and into Catalan, because in those languages, the article about the library was like, okay, few sentences, a few paragraphs. But now, if you go to Spanish Wikipedia, Catalan Wikipedia, will see that at least there's more information there than it used to be. So I really like that one, and in particular, I enjoyed the collections and everything that was there, the archives and all these manuscripts, medieval manuscripts.
Yeah,
I really enjoyed that when I was writing, and I even translated some of them
brilliant.
into Spanish. Yes.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, it's a very well, it's a fantastic place, really. Well, Gustavo, it's been a very interesting discussion, and I thank you for appearing on the first English podcast of WiciMôn. So what's next for you then?
Next for me, well, now I'm very focused on my research, really. So I'm just starting my 3rd year as a PhD student. So hopefully will be the last as well. So, and I'm working on a Wikipedia translation. So now I'm analyzing 4 language communities of Wikipedia. So Spanish, French, Dutch, and Swedish, how those communities translate, how they negotiate the translation standards. And then I'm just going to conduct some interviews with experienced Wikipedia translators from those communities to get an insight into the ways of how each particular community translates and how they follow the standards set by their respective corresponding communities. So that's basically what I'm doing now. I'm still very much involved in Wikipedia, not much as an editor, but as a researcher at the present time. And hopefully in the future, I will be able to come back and start writing again, which is something I really miss at the moment.
No, brilliant. And if you're in Wales, there's a warm welcome here on Anglesey, and we can have a real discussion and a meeting.
Yeah, I would love to. Yes,
great.
Definitely. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thanks for the chat.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gustavo. Thank you.
Bye-bye.